So this panel, as was already previously introduced, we are now talking about the really big challenge of how we scale up the funding and finance sufficient to the scale of the challenge of addressing energy poverty and improving the energy efficiency and heating systems of households in energy poverty. Just a few words before I introduce the panel on the experience of the SocialWatt project. This really was, I think, one of the most challenging problems that we came up against in the project. I don't think anyone who works in energy poverty alleviation will be surprised by that. So our utility members within the project really found, I think, that the scale, the number of people that need support within their customer bases, and then also the cost of the measures that are needed to really reduce a bill significantly and protect a household from future energy poverty. Those measures are really quite costly. You know, if we're going to make each and every one of those interactions really worthwhile by introducing some insulation measures, a deeper renovation, maybe even moving away from using fossil fuels in their heating systems. So what they found was actually utility funds alone are really not enough to address the scale of this problem. So really we need to be looking at blending, combining other funds, both public funds, national and European, and then also potentially financial mechanisms as well. And I will say in the project, I don't think we solved this. Maybe we were a bit ambitious in 3 years to think we could solve this. It is a remaining challenge, and that's why I'm really pleased to be having this panel today, near the end of the project, that we're still sort of trying to work on this project, on this issue very, very hard. So I'm really glad to then introduce the panel of 4 speakers who are going to give us the benefits of their experiences with national programmes and also with calls for additional new funding that we need. So I will go ahead and introduce. Now I've completely panicked because this is the worst bit about being a moderator in any panel is getting someone's name wrong. So I'm going to introduce Aleksander Śniegocki from the Reform Institute in Poland. He's nodding. Would you like to give your presentation?
Thanks. I think that we'll have to change slides. Yes, so perfect. So just a quick word of introduction about our institution. We are an independent think tank, not connected to government or any other institution, and we work on evaluating and supporting improvement of public policies in Poland and Europe, and we are following evolution of Polish Clean Air program quite in detail in the past and where it heads. And just to clarify, Clean Air program is a central governmental program implemented by our National Environmental Fund. So this is the case where we have a centralized nation-scale program, which tackles not only energy poverty, but basically generally renovation of buildings. Just to start to give you a sense of current state of clean air numbers and structure. So we have around 4,000 applications. And as I mentioned before, this is not only energy poverty program, it's actually only excludes households from highest income bracket. So it's a mass program, but actually if you look at the scale of support and the structure of support, nearly half of it goes to the households with low income, either very low, and they have nearly 100% subsidy, excluding value-added tax, or 70–80% subsidy for renovating their buildings to replace heat sources and improve efficiency. And new heat sources, actually over 60% now are heat pumps. Gas stoves are only 20%, and there's no new coal stove supported, which actually was not the case very recently. And interesting thing, which I maybe withheld, it's numbers for previous week. So we have 4,000 applications each week, which if you calculate it to annual renovation rate, this is something around 3% annual renovation rate for single-family households, because this program tackles single-family buildings. So this is indeed quite nice scale, which we have achieved over a few years. It's from where we started, it's rather clean in the sense that 60% goes to fully zero emission sources, and it's quite inclusive in terms of actually targeting households which have energy poverty. But how did we get here? We actually started from this place where we didn't have any program in place for single. From the start was not very proper. So it was a bit too complicated, too paper dependent. There was limited distribution of funds. So the first reform was introduced in 2020, focusing on increasing the scale, so getting the numbers up. So this was done by introducing some easier rules, so cutting out red tape, introducing more digital processes, and then also increasing cooperation with local authorities who help to distribute and increase the knowledge of the program. And the next big, it still was a program which increased in scale, but it was not very clear, it was not very deep and complex, because only half of the households actually used funds to increase efficiency. Rest only used it to replace heating stoves. And even for those who invested in renovation, it was like half of the required investments to actually achieve deep renovation and fix the problem structurally. And as I mentioned before, we still had COVID in a support scheme, but that changed radically in 2022. It was the call support was phased out. There was introduced new highest level support, which I mentioned before was 100%. 50% pre-financing was added, so you don't need to wait for the full support to be provided after the project. And after the energy crisis, there was a big shift away from gas towards heat pumps. And now the final reform recently introduced, it basically doubled maximum support. So now it's sufficient to actually achieve deep renovation. And it was actually the main point of the reform. So we're focusing on complex renovation. So we now have in the pipeline more than 500,000 households and 2.4 billion euros, and already 1 billion is spent. And the final point, if I can ask for the next slide. Yes, so I usually criticize and focus on what to improve in the program as a member of civil society, but looking back, I think it's important to first on a political level just do it, start implementing a program and improve along the way. So in the best case, in ideal scenario, you have pilot projects and then scale up. But real world sometimes works that you have to have a political buy-in and you start on a large scale and then you fix it. That's also better than not doing anything or waiting for the perfect program to happen. Then once again, high-level political ownership is important. So someone has to think that this is an important thing to do, it's an important thing to organize, to actually keep program also alive. So if it doesn't deliver, then you adjust it and you don't just kill it. And in Poland, the energy poverty issue is part of the broader set of priorities. So Clean Air actually started as a program tackling air pollution, and it's gradually evolved over time. And with active pressure from civil society. So also specific persons, leaders who just keep the pressure on the government to improve the program and focusing step by step on tackling different issues. So now we actually are working to put pressure on the government to even improve more accessibility to people in deepest problems with energy poverty, so to bring a program closer to them. And the least thing which I've discussed is financing, because even if you look at all the available sources of funding, so in Polish case we have some domestic funds coming from environmental levies, ETS, incoming ETS2, we had actual recovery plans, and energy efficiency is the largest part, largest type of investment in our recovery plan. The public money are in principle available if you put them high on the agenda and allocate it and treat this investment, because this is the final point. Energy crisis shows us that we will spend much more when the crisis hits if we're not prepared. So these are the main points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have one burning question, if I may, of you before we move on. Really just on that last point that you said, you know, the money's there if there is the will to invest it. So how in Poland, because many of the sources here that you're talking about, ETS revenues, recovery and resilience funds, they've been available to all countries. How in Poland do you think that allocation has been made? How have you made that successful?
So as usual, theoretical is that you have a policy analysis and you allocate optimally. In practice, it was obviously a political decision and fight among stakeholders. So, for instance, ETS, we still do not use it in a structured manner, but for recovery fund, it was actually a very intense fight how to allocate priorities, and it was very helpful that there was a green spending rule. So by the end of the day, it was easier for stakeholders within the government and across the government, around the government, to argue that we have this program which we have scaled up, which we have to deliver, and we need some bridge financing, and recovery funds will provide it once we get the fund, but we actually can recover the investment which we already did in the last couple of years. So by the end of the day, this is always a problem of allocating resources, not only technical, but also making sure that decision makers are aware of the problem and put it on their agendas. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we'll now move on to Quentin Hoffer from ANAH, which is the National Housing Agency in France. Also going to be presenting on what I think is probably in Europe the best, if not one of the best. Yeah, drum roll. No pressure, funding scheme in that it also, I think, enables funds to be bundled.
Sorry, if I'm not up to expectations right now. So yeah, I work for ANAH. It's a state agency for improvement of specifically private housing. So we don't work on social housing at all. Historically, we focus more on inadequate housing, and now since recent years more and more on energy savings and energy renovations. So basically, we have three different kind of interventions on the subject of energy poverty and fuel poverty. First and foremost, in France, a lot of things are pretty state-driven, and a lot of political, especially funding, is pretty state-driven. So in order for it to work, we have to contract with local authorities, so that we can work specifically on renovation and specifically on how to develop the programs locally. Then we have also a program that we coordinate at ANAH. It's a network of free public, maybe not counseling, but maybe advisor on energy savings, which is called France Rénov'. There's a little logo down there, and it's around 2,300 advisors in France, which households can go there and have some free advice and free counseling on their project. And then lastly, and it's the most money we get, in the most funds we put in there, we do help the households to fund their renovation project and give them aids directly. So to fund renovation projects, we have two different kind of interventions and two different kind of programs. One is about one-off interventions, so like to fund one or couple interventions in the household. So you change the heating system, install a heat pump, or a new ventilation system, or installations. But generally, it's only one item which is changed. So it's more about reducing carbon emissions and limit fossil fuel usage than have a really extensive renovation and extensive energy saving for the people. Before 2020, it was a tax refund, so it was mostly used by middle and high incomes households because it was distributed equally, whatever the income you get. And since 2020, it's a single aid that you get paid to the household or the contractor, and it depends on your income. So it's mostly used now by low income households. So it's quite interesting for alleviating energy poverty because, well, it's mostly low income in the households that are concerned. And on the other hand, and I think the most interesting program we got, it's more on comprehensive renovation and deep renovation, and we have a program which is called Ma Prime Rénov Sérénité. It's quite a long name, but which allows households to get funding for the project and also project management assistance, which is mandatory to get the funding with the performance requirement of 35% of energy savings. So if you don't want to have a project management, you cannot get the money, and if you don't get the performance which is required, you don't get it either. So it's interesting for getting better quality projects and more comprehensive renovation than the other program. It also exists for condominiums. I think it's American English. I don't know. Yeah, everybody get it. So it's also an aid paid to the syndicate or the homeowner association, and with no income requirements. But if you have a low income, you get a premium, another aid to help you. So the one-off intervention renovation program is around 2.3 billion euros in 2022. Comprehensive renovation program is around 800 million. Everything is state budget, so we have no private funding in that. But it can be combined with local subsidies, and that's the interest of contracting with local authorities. Then local authorities can give some funding more to the household, and you can combine it too with white certificates. So it's quite interesting. You can have quite a comprehensive funding for your projects. But the downside of it is that it's up to the household to get this additional funding. So it's quite a lot of paperwork. It can be quite complicated for them. So we have to work on that for maybe combine the different fundings and give only one aid to the people. In 2022, we funded around a bit more than 600,000 renovations, but it's mostly one-off interventions. We got around 65,000 comprehensive renovations, and it's mostly through the contracts between the agency and the local authorities. So since we get a contract, it's easier for the local authorities to detect the household, and then we can work better with them and help them to get the renovation. And what's interesting is that I told before that the performance requirements was an energy saving of 35%. And when we look at what's done and the renovations that are done, we are more around an average of 50% energy savings. So it's quite interesting. Yeah, this is it for me. Maybe just a little thing about the one-off intervention renovation program. It's so since 2020 it's a single aid, but it's all digitalized and very centralized. So it's quite dependent on the quality of the validation process we got for the funding, and what we actually one of the learnings of this aid is that the easier it is to get the financial aid, the easier it is to abuse the system. So we also have a lot of problems with fraud. since you just go on the internet, and on the internet you do well, you build your file, but it's quite easy to have some problems with that, and maybe some companies that do demand funding but do not install stuff at home, so it's quite complicated for us to know what it's really, if we really found renovations or if we found some companies that use it to get money and not renovate houses. Yeah, that's it for me.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I should say actually we were going to have the 4 presentations. I'm taking the liberty of popping questions in at will, but we will have time at the end for questions from the room here and also online. So it seems, I mean, already from the 2 presentations we've heard, we're sort of building up a picture of kind of what good design looks like. You know, I've heard we need dedicated funding, high levels of funding for households with very low incomes, project management assistance or assistance to devise the project itself. And also sort of some interesting notes here about making the application process less complicated, but then also making sure that it's robust enough to make sure that it's, so that's really useful. But my question to you is, I was really struck by both this slide and the previous slide that both the budget and the number of renovations being achieved through the lower income dedicated funds are quite a lot smaller than the general population funds. And I think we're kind of realising increasingly that with limited public funds available for in the scale of the challenge that we have, there's going to be some difficult decisions about the use of public funds in the future. And I suppose my question to you is, do you think that budget allocation will continue in that way, or is there a view to seeing the allocation for lower income households increase?
It's actually reviewed. Actually, I don't really know, because we are a state agency, but we don't make the policy. So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to correct the imbalance and give more funding to the comprehensive renovation programs and a bit less on one-off intervention, because it's less interesting and less quality. So and also we want to add more funding to the assistance program, because well, you can fund a lot of things, but if it's batch projects, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So now our 3rd presentation comes from an experience in Austria. We have Klemens. Oh, I'm going to say it wrong.
Leutgöb, typical Austrian name. Sorry for that.
We have Klemens Leutgöb. I did practice that before and then panicked. To present to us experiences and funding programs in Austria and the lessons learned there.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, perhaps before I start with an overview on the specific programs for vulnerable households, I would like to tell that you have to understand that in Austria we have a very huge subsidy landscape. Typically for Austrian policy, if you have a problem, then throw money on it and the problem is solved. So therefore we have a lot of subsidies in the federal counties. They look different, and we have this kind of subsidies also for renovation, for energy efficiency measures. Over time it has become clear that this is mostly subsidies for middle and higher income classes, because they can afford renovation of houses, and it was not accepted and used by low-income households. Therefore, over the last few years, I must say it's really only the last few years, policymakers are thinking more about how to deal with vulnerable households, how to solve the energy poverty problem, also in terms of funding. And a predecessor program was an initiative by a utility, the Verbund, together with the Austrian Caritas, who have addressed specifically this target group of vulnerable households. They built a fund, a Stromhilfe fund, and they are providing energy advice, replacement mostly of household appliances, and settlement of outstanding invoices. This was originally funded only by the energy utility, and now due to the success of the approach, this has now been expanded at the government level. So the Austrian Energy and Climate Fund will finance this in the next 3 years at least. And the management will go on to be organized by social actors like Caritas or other institutions in the social field. Then there is a program specifically for replacing of fossil fuel heating systems, targeting single-family houses all over Austria. This is organized by the federal states. So at the end, we have 9 different ways how this program is organized, and it turned out that the states organized is completely different. Some do it quite successfully, others find very little acceptance for this program. We are currently evaluating the reasons behind. We don't understand it ourselves, how this can happen, but it happens. Also, we are now involved in developing a similar program for the multifamily houses sector, which is of course more difficult. For multifamily house sector, at the moment there is only a specific program which is targeting at listed charities, at municipalities that have a social housing stock. So at facilitators who can channel these kind of renovations, but this is not open for any kind of multifamily house. So it's a very limited sector where this program will become, will have an impact. It is financed from the Austria's Recovery and Resilience Plan, and funding may reach up to 100% depending on the applications. So this is tendered out to these listed charities, to NGOs, and they can apply for their projects. One problem is that all the projects, renovation projects, have to be finished by end of 2025, which in practice is a real barrier. Yeah, if you want to organize such a project, 2 years, 3 years is nothing. Yeah. And perhaps a last slide on a pilot action, which we have accompanied from our side, a very focused action to find some quick solutions for vulnerable households. I mean, deep renovation is not easy to organize. You, as we have seen also from France, it's always easier to make some targeted actions. And here we have accompanied a program where pellet stoves have been installed in vulnerable households. The advantage is that there is a quite low risk of the households to overstretch their heating budget because you have to buy the energy source in advance. So if you don't have enough money, then you can't buy, or you have to heat less. We have made some analysis on that. Georg is sitting there, knows every detail about this, and now it is envisaged that the lessons learned will be transferred to the ongoing other funding programs. So I'm coming to the lessons learned. Still the funding programs are focusing on, let's say, the simpler use cases, exchange of heating system, electric appliances. Deep renovation is, as I said, for the moment only for very specific cases where these projects can be channeled through social actors. It's a major challenge to reach the concerned households. As I've said, in some of the regions, this works quite well since they collaborate with networks from the social sphere, whereas in other regions they are just sitting and waiting, and if no one rings up, then the money remains there. And what we also see is that besides the subsidies, vulnerable households really need this special accompaniment in order to be able to use these programs. Therefore, it's not just the money, it's also the way how you address and how you accompany these households concerned. Yeah, I think this was my last slide. Louise, if you have any question, of course, I'm prepared.
Thank you. I'm going to, looking at time, I'm going to hold back from the questions I have so as to allow the audience. And we will also just, as we had an extra little break, we will also just overrun to 12:40 slightly into the lunch break. But that's allowing for the fact that we started slightly later. So finally in our list, I should actually just say as well, I think quite a lot of policies and schemes, funding programs have been covered by Klemens in Austria. They are also written up in a country fact sheets that's now on the SocialWatt website. Will be joined by, I think, another 9 country fact sheets doing exactly the same thing. So lots more detail there. And then now I can hand to ANAH Bajomi from FEANTSA, which is the Federation of National Organisations working with the homeless. And I think we've heard already is a lot of use of European funds, but European funds that are quite finite. And I think that to a lot of us highlights a risk of stop-go funding. And so I think ANAH has.
So welcome everybody. In the next few minutes, I'm going to present our suggestion to establish a cold house fund. And why do we need that? It's because, as most of you know already, as you are working on energy poverty, that poorest households are living in the worst performing dwellings, are overrepresented in that part of the building stock. And they would most need the renovation because they are living in improper housing conditions. But in many cases, they do not have access to funding because of their financial situation. And there is also many upcoming policy developments that might impact their situation, such as the minimum energy performance standards that have to be applied to that segment of the housing. Also, the ETS can put taxes on their energy consumption. So it is really important to guarantee that no one is left behind in the energy transition process. And with such a really socially targeted funding, we can reach the social and climate justice goals and also improve the housing sector by providing affordable and decent housing for all. So currently there are financial barriers that are faced by low-income households because, as we know, renovations have high upfront costs. But many of the vulnerable households has really low financial capacity. Therefore, they are not able to access loans and they do not have savings neither. So basically, due to their low incomes, and high probability that they are already paying mortgages for their homes, and they can also be in an insecure job market position. So the bank won't assess them as a good customer and won't provide them a loan. And finally, they might also be already indebted toward utility customers or other sources of debts because of their financial situations. So all these factors are making them so they might be left behind from all the mainstream financing sources that are, of course, necessary to move forward the general large-scale renovation that is needed in the European building stock. But private sector investment, mainstream green loans, and post-financing subsidies that are dominating the currently available funding sources. are just not reaching these households. Also, tax schemes and pay-as-you-save schemes can leave behind the poorer households. And here we hear examples of households that are using solid fuels, firewood or coal in Central Eastern Europe, and for them, for example, on-build financing will not be an option to finance the renovations. And just a few examples, over half of Hungarian households only have savings just to live for 1 month, but also in the richer region of the Flemish region of Belgium, nearly 90% of households in the poorest 1/3 of the society, they are not able to attract loans because they already have a mortgage or there are other financial difficulties. So it's like really a dominant segment that will not be able to access loans and other mainstream financing solutions for renovations. So therefore, we are suggesting to establish a courthouse fund, which would finance the renovation of those that otherwise would be left behind from the renovation programs. This fund should cover 100% of the renovation cost upfront, plus provide technical assistance and social assistance, for example, in relocation or gaining trust. And then, of course, the fund can become progressively repayable in order to be sustainable as the income increase so if the household has higher income and is capable to repay the fund from the savings, then of course it's very welcome. The funding sources can be really variable. The Social Climate Fund is often cited as the major solution to guarantee social justice in the energy transition, but it won't be enough to cover all the necessities. Therefore, it's important to dedicate funding from the more traditional EU funds in this, covering also the social aspects of the renovations. And we also expect construction companies that will benefit from the large renovation wave to dedicate some of their incomes into social beneficiaries. Finally, national ETS revenues are already used, but in many cases also still targeting middle-income households, so this should be diversified. And then there is an important role of the banking sector to activate their social banking profiles so that maybe they can cover financing when households can only access funds that pay after the renovation is made, so they can cover up the upfront costs. And then, because we are talking about the energy saving directive a lot today, I would also highlight that reaching the Article 8 obligations of energy companies, we can so we should integrate those measures to the larger renovation programs. And yeah, so we have a few studies also talking about how to integrate low-income households into the energy transition. So if you're interested, you can check that on our website.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was, I think, that final point that you made on the last slide about, about the kind of coherence of funding. I think you're right to identify there are a number of sources. Increasingly, actually, I think with the negotiations of the Fit for 55 package, we've heard already earlier today from Veronica as well about, as you highlight, changes in the Energy Efficiency Directive. They're quite disparate, though, aren't they, with the Social Climate Fund over here and ETS national revenues over here and possibly Article 8 programmes living somewhere else. So I think it's a really important point about making all of this a lot more coherent and therefore kind of putting the priority on the lower income households that are going to benefit from those. So we have some time for questions, both from the room and I'm looking at Camilla for questions online.
Hello, this is Dirk van Opshoven again, independent energy engineer. On the funding, I have a question. In Belgium, there is a scheme, for instance, in the town of Ghent, where public authorities give 0 interest rate loans to vulnerable households. and the public authorities themselves lend it from the banks, and until recently they could get it at nearly zero cost too. But the household only has to pay back the loan when it sells its property, the house, because in the meantime they probably don't have the sufficient funds. But as the house gets an increased value due to the energy renovation, if it's a full renovation, deep renovation, the idea is that at this time of sales, it will have more value on the market, and that this extra value is then returned to pay for the loan. What do the people of the panel think about this scheme? It can mobilize a lot of private banking capital to finance upfront and the risk is taken by the public authorities who act as an intermediate between the banks and the vulnerable households.
Thank you. Who would like to comment on that? Quentin, I'm looking at you because I think, have you experienced with it, could you?
Yeah. But in France, we have kind of a bit of both. We have a zero interest loan, but that you have to pay month by month. And we have also, but it's quite new, so there's not a lot of examples of that. A new loan that you pay in fine, so at the end when you sell, but with interest. So it's actually can be quite expensive for the others. So it's not. It's more for like people of our 70 years old that have difficulties to go to the traditional banking system, and then they have this kind of specific loan. But it's, I mean, for traditional households, it's not really interesting.
Maybe in Poland we have also banking option in this clean air program, but the lessons learned is that it's not very easy to scale it up because, for instance, banks have their own competing activities, so they have to also be interested in becoming a partner in this program and actually actively distribute this as an option. So once again, I would repeat that you have to start activity and then adjust as you go, because you may find that you have put the program in place, but banks are, for instance, not very actively promoting it. So, but this is an interesting option. Maybe one more sentence is that I would also look at private companies delivering the service. So that may be actually a good intermediate with banking sector or funding organizations, and this is something which we probably have to explore more and practice more across Europe.
Maybe just one point about scalability. It's also hard to scale it because it's actually quite expensive for the public funds to pay the interest because especially now the rates are pretty high, so it can cost quite a lot of money when you add a lot of projects on that.
So it sounds like we'd like to hear from Ghent and how that goes. I think what this example is pointing to is very much, you know, we're going to need a lot of different mechanisms for different types of households. Of course, this is something that would possibly serve a sector of households that are what we call kind of asset rich but income poor. So are you living in a house that obviously the asset has grown, but they don't want to move out, and why should they? I think there is a question also there though around that obviously wouldn't be suitable for how households in areas where there is a risk that the asset value might go down. So areas that are having populations move away and there aren't jobs. So I think it's a great example, and I think it's one that illustrates that we need lots of different tools for different household situations. I think Guillaume had a.
Thanks. Guillaume Joly, BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. I have a question for Aleksander regarding the details for the red tape you got rid of, because I have the French example in mind. Quentin quickly presented the different stakeholders. You have even more, like association to help households, etc. So disbursing the money is quite complicated, I would say. So I would like to hear from you, because I found it quite impressive regarding the year you launched it, the budget, and you have the number of people you reached It's quite impressive. So some details would be super useful. Thanks.
Thanks. So I think that we started with even more income brackets. So like I think it was like 6 or 7 different support levels. There were issues for checking the incomes between the administration, and there was an issue with involving local authorities because we have a system of regional, so national and regional funds, environmental funds, but this means that they have on their own like one institution per region. What was done, there was some additional support, small incentive for local authorities to actually open the like support window, and you can actually put in your application, or even the local authorities support you in filling in application, which is also something which helps the local authorities deal with local problem. One thing which may be not very clear for colleagues from other parts of Europe is that in Poland it's very much about air pollution problem. So if you have one energy poor household, not necessarily even energy poor, burning whatever they can, that actually is a problem for the whole local community because they breathe with that. So there's a strong incentive to act, and you can leverage that also to distribute funds because there is more willingness to engage in the process. And we have a bit more details on that in our publications. They're mostly in Polish, but we try to translate what we can.
Yes, Diana Yurdinova, Housing Europe. I have a question to Quentin, but before I would just like to first, when you mentioned what was being done in Ghent, I thought, oh, that's great because you support vulnerable households to improve their homes. But then after like 1 second, I was like, hold on a little bit. That means that we keep on kind of accepting the same thinking that in the long term, house prices must grow, and they have already skyrocketed in many places. And the risk that I see there is that if we are supporting vulnerable households' homes, that most likely means, I'm generalizing here, but maybe that they don't live in the best areas of Ghent, I'm just saying. And then if we improve those homes, and if we then hope that then they will be sold at a higher price, there is a possibility that those homes would be bought by another class, and those vulnerable people will be further pushed away from the city, pushing them away from jobs, from opportunities, from services. And that is something that we at Housing Europe, but also FEANTSA, also the International Union of Tenants, repeatedly try to say out loud, because it's the risk that we really see with the resilience funds, but also with everything that is going on around the renovation. So in one hand, we really need that very urgently, but also that was my question to Quentin. You help private homeowners, which is great because there is really need out there. But I was wondering whether the agency has put in place some mechanisms or tools or monitoring to make sure that those funds, once they have been implemented and the homes have been improved, that we don't contribute to, I don't know, that becoming a short-term rental, a vacation home, or maybe being sold at a higher price, and then driving further on affordability, which, especially in the bigger cities, is becoming really a serious problem. Thanks a lot.
A lot of the financial firms are really for the homeowners. So yeah, the fact that it transforms into touristic locations is not really a problem. We don't really have the case for it, but yeah, the fact that they may sell the house quite quickly is a problem. But in a way, it's a renovated home, so it's also a better place to live and a better home for maybe somebody else. But still, we did improve the conditions. There are a lot of in theory in the law, a lot of conditions and that you have to respect, and then yeah, you don't have to sell it immediately, etc. But we cannot control it because there are too many people using the funds. So yeah, it's a good question that I don't really have an answer to in brief.
Thank you. Do you want to do my job for you? I think you'd be better. Anna, I wonder if we could come to you as well, because obviously I know you're, as has been mentioned, you're working on this and some of the safeguards that we need around ensuring that, yes, we need to address the structural problem behind a lot of energy poverty, which is the homes, but then in doing that, we do also enter these risks.
So thank you for your question, and also for Diana to raising these important concerns. There are important social safeguards that really should be implemented, and they are already included in some of the elements of the European the energy performance of building directives. But we need to make sure that these are implemented really efficiently. So there are two main issues in this aspect. One is regarding the rental sector, where the landlords can increase rents because your apartment is now better, so you need to pay more, but you are not able to cover that increase with your energy savings necessarily. So there should be strong monitoring of rent increases, and also the application of rent caps in countries where the legislation makes that possible. And also at the level of district renovations, it's really important to make sure that no households will be pushed out from the neighborhood, starting from the most vulnerable ones that might have not really secure tenure status in their neighborhood. And finally, with the homeowners, the risk is more like what I've been mentioning in my presentation, that they have no access to funding, so they are left out from the benefits of the transition, and therefore the necessary thing to do is to finance them properly and adequately.
Thank you. I believe we have a question, not to leave the people online out. I believe we have a question from online as well.
Yeah, we had a question addressed during Aleksander's presentation from Paula Fonseca, who says you indicate 50.8% savings. And the question is, did you monitor the savings and how? And did you address behavior? Sorry, it was written during his presentation, so it was addressed for you. You indicate 50.8% savings. Did you monitor the savings and how? And if you addressed behavior?
Yeah, no, it's not monitored. It's a theoretical projection from what kind of interventions are done, and then there is a diagnosis before and a projection after that we use to allocate the funding, and then we use this projection. So it's not monitored. Yeah, we do. So there are some projects locally actually monitor, and it's quite close to the projection, so it's quite interesting. But yeah, there's quite a big behavioral component to that, and that we actually cannot really. Well, we are a state agency, so it's quite hard to have such a specific policy. Yeah, but it's really important. It's really important.
To add from Polish experience, so we also do not have like ex post monitoring, but what was recently introduced or strengthened is that you have to have energy audit before you get the money if you want to get this higher funding for renovation. So it's once again a bit theoretical, but at the same time, if you go for heat pump plus energy efficiency invent, you can expect that you will land into something which is quite efficient and zero emission, which solves the problem at least to the best possible approximation. I would be very careful about introducing strong ex post conditionality, because for many households it would be too much risk, because what happens if you deliver, if you do not deliver? And the once again final sentence is that if you introduce companies as intermediaries, that may solve a bit, because then they are liable for delivering high quality renovation. But that's another topic.
Thank you very much. I